The moment my name wasn't on the guest list, I felt the sting of humiliation crawl up my spine like a cold shiver. I had spent the morning getting ready, pressed my nicest dress, curled my hair, and even baked my famous lemon bars, thinking it might help me feel included. But when I reached the entrance to the Crescent Heights annual summer block party, Heather Prescott, standing by the registration booth with her perfect white teeth and clipboard, raised her eyebrows and smiled that slow, cruel smile. "Oh, Marcia," she said, drawing out my name like it had a bad taste. "I'm afraid your name isn't on the guest list." Gasps, giggles, and then full-blown laughter from the cluster of neighbors behind me. Janine Ellis practically choked on her mimosa. Someone whispered, "Well, what did she expect?" I stood there, holding my lemon bars, heart pounding, face flushed with shame. I wasn't just turned away. I was erased, like I had never been a part of this community. And then, the mayor's phone started ringing. Once, twice, 3 times, loud, urgent. He tried to silence it, but the calls kept coming, one after another. He finally answered, his face changing from cheerful to pale in seconds. And suddenly, everyone stopped laughing. 20 years in Crescent Heights, and I had become a ghost in my own neighborhood. Not literally invisible, of course, but socially erased. The kind of person others look through rather than at. The kind whose absence at gatherings goes unnoticed. Whose presence at meetings is met with polite disinterest. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when our street was different, when neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and watched each other's children. Back then, I was Marcia Ellington, beloved high school literature teacher, wife to David, and the woman who organized the first 3 summer block parties on Maple Lane. But that was before David clutched his chest one ordinary Tuesday morning and was gone before the ambulance arrived. Before Heather Prescott moved in with her Instagram perfect family and gradually appointed herself the neighborhood's social director. Before I retreated into the quiet sanctuary of my books and garden, finding solace in silence while the world around me grew louder, more competitive, more exclusive. Just ignore them, my friend Eleanor had advised when I called her in tears after the Homeowners Association meeting last month. They're shallow people with empty lives. But Eleanor didn't understand. She lived across town in a community of artists and retirees who held potlucks and poetry readings. She didn't know what it felt like to be surrounded by people who had once been friends, but now barely acknowledged your existence. I placed my lemon bars on the kitchen counter and stared at them, their cheerful yellow crusts now a monument to my humiliation. The clock on the wall read 2:37 p.m. The block party would go until sunset. Everyone would be there. Everyone except me. I moved to the living room window and peered through the curtains. From here, I could see the festivities 2 blocks down. Balloons bobbed against the clear blue sky. Children darted between tables. Music drifted on the summer breeze. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "How's the party?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. What would I say? That I, a 56-year-old woman, had been publicly humiliated like a teenager not cool enough for the popular table? That I'd walked home alone while people I'd known for decades laughed behind my back? Instead, I made tea and carried it to my home office. The small room overlooked my backyard garden, a riot of summer blooms that David and I had planned together. I sat at my desk, the familiar oak surface worn smooth from years of grading papers and writing lesson plans. My laptop hummed to life. Without really thinking about it, I opened my email and began typing. Not to Eleanor. Not to anyone I knew would respond with pity or outrage. On my behalf, I wrote to Michael Chen. "Dear Michael," I typed, "you may not remember me, but I was your English teacher at Santa Clarita High, class of 2009. I recently saw in the local paper that you're now working in the mayor's office. I hope this email finds you well." I paused, fingers hovering over the keys. What was I doing? Was I really going to complain to a former student about neighborhood drama? How pathetic had I become? But then I remembered Michael, bright, thoughtful Michael who'd written an essay about community that had moved me to tears. Michael, whose graduation card to me had said, "You taught me that words have power, and silence can be a choice, not a sentence." I continued writing, not about the party or Heather, but about the changing nature of community. About how I missed the days when neighborhoods were more than just adjacent houses. I wrote about my years teaching literature and the lessons I hoped had stayed with my students. I mentioned that I still volunteered at the library's literacy program, still anonymously funded 3 scholarships at the high school each year. I'm writing because I wonder if the mayor's office has any community. building initiatives that could help bridge the growing divide I see in neighborhoods like mine, I concluded. Not for my sake, I'm just one person, but for all the people who feel invisible in their own communities. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then closed my laptop and carried my cold tea to the garden. The late afternoon sun warmed my shoulders as I dead-headed roses and pulled stray weeds, methodical work that had always calmed my mind. An hour later, my phone chimed with an email notification. "Mrs. Ellington, is this really you? I can't believe it. Of course I remember you. Your class changed my life." Michael's enthusiastic response made me smile for the first time that day. "The mayor would definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. In fact, he's at a neighborhood event right now, but I'm going to call him. We've been looking for someone with your experience and perspective for our new cultural board initiative. Can I stop by tomorrow to talk more?" I stared at the screen, confusion replacing my earlier sadness. Cultural board? The mayor wanted to talk to me? Before I could process this unexpected turn, my doorbell rang. Dread pooled in my stomach. Was it Heather or one of her friends coming to twist the knife? I peered through the peephole and froze. Standing on my porch, looking uncharacteristically solemn, was Mayor Robert Sanders himself. "Mrs. Ellington," he said when I cautiously opened the door, "I believe we need to talk." And that's when I realized the phone calls at the party. They had been about me. "May I come in?" Mayor Sanders asked, his usual camera-ready smile replaced by a look of genuine concern. I nodded, suddenly aware of my gardening apron and dirt-smudged hands. "Of course. I'm sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting company." He followed me into the living room, declining my offer of tea or water. "Mrs. Ellington, Marcia, I owe you an apology." "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. I barely knew. Robert Sanders had only seen him at community functions and in the local newspaper. "For what happened at the Crescent Heights block party today." He sat on the edge of my sofa, looking uncomfortable in his pressed shirt and tie. "I had no idea who you were when it happened. That is, I knew you were a resident, but I didn't realize you were the Marcia Ellington." The way he emphasized my name made no sense. I was just Marcia, the widow, the retired teacher, the woman who had been laughed out of her own neighborhood party hours earlier. "I don't understand," I said, perching on the armchair opposite him. "I received multiple calls this afternoon," he explained, "from the superintendent of schools, from 3 city council members, from the library board, all asking the same question. Did we really just humiliate Marcia Ellington, one of the most respected educators in Santa Clarita history?" I blinked, warmth rising to my cheeks. That's an exaggeration. Is it?" The mayor pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. "Here's one from Judge Martinez. Robert, I just heard what happened to Marcia Ellington. She tutored my son for free when no one else could reach him. He's now at Stanford because of her. And here's one from Principal Abernathy. The woman funded anonymous scholarships for underprivileged kids for years. She never wanted recognition." Each message he read aloud felt like a surreal dream. These were people I had worked with, students I had taught, members of a community I had served quietly and without expectation of recognition. I had never done anything extraordinary, just tried to be kind, to give what I could, to make small differences where possible. When Michael Chen called me, the mayor continued, I couldn't believe what he was telling me. But then the calls and texts started pouring in. "Do you have any idea how many lives you've touched, Mrs. Ellington?" I stared at my hands, unable to meet his gaze. I was just doing my job. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. He leaned forward. And today, at that party, you were treated abominably by people who had no idea who they were dismissing. The memory of Heather's smirk and the neighbor's laughter suddenly seemed far away, as if it had happened to someone else. "What did you do?" I asked, dreading the answer. "At the party after the calls?" Mayor Sanders looked slightly uncomfortable. "I may have made an announcement about who you are and what you've meant to this city, and then I left, along with about half the guests." My stomach dropped. "Oh, no. I'm sorry if that embarrasses you," he said quickly. "But some things need to be said aloud. Heather Prescott and her social committee don't get to decide who belongs in this community." A strange mixture of emotions washed over me, gratitude, embarrassment, and something that felt dangerously close to vindication. I pushed the last one away. I had never wanted revenge or public recognition. "Thank you for your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not interested in neighborhood drama. I've made my peace with being on the outside." "That's just it," he replied, standing now and pacing my small living room. You shouldn't have to be on the outside. And the city needs people like you on the inside. Of our planning, our community building, our future. He turned to face me. Michael Chen mentioned our new cultural board to you. It's an initiative to bridge gaps between neighborhoods, to rebuild the sense of community that's been lost. We need someone with your experience, your compassion, to help lead it. I stared at him, speechless. After years of feeling invisible, of my voice being dismissed at neighborhood meetings, of emails to the homeowners association going unanswered, now the mayor himself was in my living room, offering me a position of influence. I'm retired, I said finally. I'm not looking for a new career. This isn't about a career, he countered. It's about sharing wisdom, about making sure others don't feel the way you felt today. His words struck a chord. How many others in Crescent Heights or across Santa Clarita felt as I did? The elderly widower 3 doors down who never joined community events. The young single mother at the end of the block who worked 2 jobs and couldn't attend daytime functions. The immigrant family on Oak Street whose halting English made them targets for gossip rather than inclusion. I'll think about it, I promised, not yet ready to commit. Mayor Sanders nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. As he headed toward the door, he paused by the mantel where a photo of David and me stood, taken on our last anniversary before his death. Your husband would be proud, he said softly. After he left, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, mind whirling with the day's events. From humiliation to whatever this was. Validation, opportunity, a chance to turn pain into purpose. My phone buzzed again, another email from Michael Chen. Mrs. E, the mayor just called me, said he met with you. Please say yes to the cultural board. Santa Clarita needs you. I need you. P.S. Remember when you told our class that silence isn't always golden? That sometimes the world needs our voices? Time to take your own advice. I smiled despite myself. Michael always did have a way with words. Outside, twilight settled over Crescent Heights. The sounds of the block party had faded. Tomorrow would bring a new reality, one where my neighbors would look at me differently, where whispers would follow me for new reasons. But tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The next morning, my doorbell began ringing at 8:30 a.m. First came Mrs. Takahashi from across the street, carrying a potted orchid and looking uncomfortable. I've lived beside you for 12 years, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I should have been a better neighbor. I'm sorry. I accepted her gift with as much grace as I could muster, assuring her there was nothing to apologize for, though we both knew that wasn't true. By noon, my kitchen counter was crowded with peace offerings. Flowers, wine bottles, home-baked goods. Each delivery came with stammered apologies and awkward explanations. I had no idea you funded those scholarships. My nephew was in your I class back in 2010. He said you changed his life. The mayor said some things yesterday that made us all think. I received each visitor with the same polite smile, the same gentle assurances. What else could I do? Slam the door in their faces? Tell them their sudden interest in my existence came 5 years too late? I wasn't raised that way. Besides, their discomfort was punishment enough. Around 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. This time I opened it to find Janine Ellis, the woman who had choked on her mimosa while laughing at my humiliation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usually immaculate makeup slightly smudged. Marcia, she began, voice cracking. I don't know what to say. I waited, one hand on the doorframe. After 20 seconds of uncomfortable silence, I finally took pity on her. Would you like to come in, Janine? She nodded gratefully and followed me to the kitchen, where I poured us both iced tea. We sat at my small breakfast table, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced between us like tiny, visible barriers. I brought you this, she said, pushing a gift bag across the table. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal. I remembered you used to keep a journal. You mentioned it once at a book club meeting years ago. The fact that she remembered this small detail about me, despite years of treating me like I was invisible, made something inside me soften slightly. Thank you, I said. It's lovely. Janine twisted her wedding ring nervously. Marcia, what the mayor said yesterday about all you've done for this community. Is it true? The scholarships? The tutoring? All of it? I sipped my tea, considering my answer. I've tried to help where I could. We all have our ways of contributing. But why so secretly? Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Her question revealed so much about the gulf between us. In her world, Heather's world, good deeds were currency to be spent on social advancement. You didn't donate anonymously. You made sure your name topped the donor list. You didn't quietly tutor struggling students. You posted about it on social media with carefully filtered photos. Because it wasn't about me, I said simply. It was about them, the students, the families. Janine looked genuinely perplexed, and I felt a surprising wave of pity for her. How exhausting it must be, I thought, to constantly perform your life rather than live it. The whole neighborhood is talking, she confessed. Heather's been asked to step down from the social committee. There's a petition going around. I set my glass down with more force than intended. I don't want that. You don't? Janine looked surprised. No, this isn't about punishment or revenge. I looked out the window at my garden, where summer blooms reached toward the sun, untouched by human drama. I just wanted to belong, to be seen as a person worthy of basic courtesy. Janine's eyes filled with tears. I've been horrible, she whispered. We all have. I couldn't argue with that, but I also couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Her guilt was hers to process, not mine to absolve. What happens now? She asked after a long silence. Now, I said, we try to be better neighbors. All of us. After Janine left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by guilt offerings from people who had ignored me for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent so long feeling invisible, and now I couldn't escape being seen. My phone rang. It was Michael Chen. Mrs. E, I've been thinking about the cultural board. If you join, and I really hope you will, your first initiative could be a series of neighborhood connection events. Not fancy parties, but meaningful gatherings, book exchanges, skill-sharing workshops, community gardening days. Things that bring people together based on what they contribute, not what they own or how they look. His enthusiasm was infectious. That sounds wonderful, Michael, but I haven't decided yet if I'm joining. What's holding you back? He asked. I considered the question. What was holding me back? Fear of stepping into the spotlight after years in the shadows? Reluctance to work alongside people who had dismissed me? Or something deeper? The comfort of righteous injury? The safety of low expectations? I need time, I said finally. This all happened so fast. Of course, Michael replied, his voice gentler now. Take all the time you need, but remember what you taught us about Thoreau? The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. You showed us there's another way to live. After we hung up, I wandered into my study and pulled my worn copy of Walden from the shelf. How many students had I guided through these pages? How many young minds had I encouraged to question, to seek, to contribute? I opened my laptop and began to write. Not an acceptance email to Michael, not yet. Instead, I wrote about community, about belonging, about the invisible threads that connect neighbors, even when they pretend not to see each other. I wrote about David, about how his death had turned me inward, about how I had allowed my grief to become a barrier between myself and others. I wrote until the room grew dark, until my fingers ached, until the words blurred on the screen. And when I finally stopped, I realized I had written not just about the past, but about possibilities, about what Crescent Heights could become, about what I could become if I chose to step back into the light. The next morning, I called Michael and accepted the position. The Crescent Heights Community Center was a modern building of glass and reclaimed wood, paid for by property taxes that had risen steadily since the neighborhood became desirable 10 years ago. I'd been inside exactly twice, once for a town hall meeting about speed bumps, and once to vote in a local election. Now, as I pushed through the heavy front doors, I felt like an intruder. The cultural board meeting was scheduled in Conference Room B, down a hallway lined with photographs of smiling community members at various events. I recognized several neighbors in the pictures. My face wasn't among them. Mrs. Ellington! Michael Chen hurried toward me, his dress shirt slightly rumpled, his smile as bright as I remembered from his high school days. You came! I said I would, I reminded him, returning his smile despite my nerves. He guided me down the hallway, talking rapidly about the other board members, the agenda, the mayor's vision. I half listened, more focused on controlling the flutter of anxiety in my chest. What was I doing here? I was a retired teacher, not a community organizer or public figure. Conference Room B was already half full when we entered. Mayor Sanders stood as soon as he saw me, crossing the room with his hand extended. Marcia, so glad you could join us. He turned to the room. Everyone, This is Marcia Ellington, the newest member of our cultural board. 7 faces turned toward me with varying expressions: curiosity, warmth, assessment. I recognized the school superintendent and a city council member. The others were strangers, though one woman looked vaguely familiar. Marcia, the mayor continued, you know Superintendent Davis and Councilwoman Rodriguez. This is Dr. Lee from the university's sociology department, Pastor Williams from Hope Community Church, Ms. Diaz from the Arts Council, Mr. Patel who runs our community development program, and we've met, interrupted the familiar-looking woman, rising from her seat. I'm Janet Wilkins. You tutored my son Kevin in 2011. He's graduating from medical school next month. I remembered Kevin, a bright boy who struggled with reading comprehension, whose single mother worked night shifts as a nurse. Kevin is becoming a doctor? That's wonderful. Janet smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. He wanted me to thank you. Said he never would have made it through high school English without you. The atmosphere in the room shifted, warming perceptibly. These weren't Heather Prescott's crowd. These were people who valued substance over style, contribution over consumption. The meeting proceeded smoothly. The mayor outlined the cultural board's mission: to foster inclusive community connections across Santa Clarita, beginning with pilot programs in neighborhoods, like Crescent Heights that had become increasingly divided by socioeconomic factors. We've lost something essential, he said. Neighbors used to know each other. They shared tools, watched each other's children, celebrated together and mourned together. Now we have beautiful houses filled with strangers. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. Marcia, the mayor continued, we'd like you to head our first initiative, a series of community-building events right in Crescent Heights, something different from the usual social committee offerings. All eyes turned to me expectantly. The old Marcia would have demurred, would have suggested someone more qualified, but I thought of the email I'd written to Michael, of the ideas that had flowed once I allowed myself to imagine a different kind of community. I have some thoughts, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Not about parties or social events, but about meaningful connections. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined my vision. Neighborhood skill-sharing workshops where residents could teach and learn from each other, a community garden project on the vacant lot at the end of Maple Lane, a little free library network, with book exchanges and reading circles, a weekly neighbors' table dinner where hosting duties rotated among volunteer households. The goal isn't just activities, I explained. It's about creating spaces where people see each other as individuals with value to contribute, regardless of their home's square footage or their car's price tag. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Dr. Lee leaned forward. This is exactly the kind of initiative that builds what sociologists call social capital, the networks of relationships that help communities thrive. I love it. One by one, the others chimed in with enthusiasm, suggestions, offers of support. Even Councilwoman Rodriguez, known for her fiscal conservatism, nodded approvingly. Low cost, high impact. Exactly what we need. The meeting concluded with concrete next steps. I would draft a formal proposal, Michael would create marketing materials, the mayor would secure funding for supplies and permits. We would launch the first initiative, the Community Garden Project, in 3 weeks. As we filed out of the conference room, Mayor Sanders pulled me aside. Impressive presentation, Marcia. I knew you were the right person for this. Thank you for the opportunity, I replied. Though I have to admit, I'm a bit overwhelmed. You won't be doing this alone, he assured me. The whole board is behind you. Outside the community center, the July sun beat down on the parking lot. As I fumbled for my car keys, a sleek white SUV pulled up beside me. The window rolled down to reveal Heather Prescott's perfectly made-up face. My stomach clenched. I hadn't seen her since that day at the block party. Marcia, she said, her voice artificially bright. I heard you were here. Do you have a minute? I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming. A rehearsed apology, perhaps, or a passive-aggressive comment disguised as concern. I wanted to let you know, she said, that I've stepped down from the social committee. Effective immediately. I heard, I replied neutrally. That wasn't necessary, Heather. I never asked for that. She waved a manicured hand dismissively. It was time for a change. Besides, I've been so busy with my real estate business. She paused, then added with forced casualness. I also heard you're heading some new community initiative. I could read between the lines. Heather wasn't sorry. She was threatened. In her world, influence was a zero-sum game. My rise meant her fall. Yes, I said simply. A series of neighborhood connection projects. Everyone's welcome to participate. She nodded, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, good luck with that. I'm sure it will be nice. As she drove away, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion. How exhausting it must be to constantly defend your position at the top of a meaningless social hierarchy. How lonely to view neighbors as competitors rather than companions. I drove home with the windows down, letting the summer breeze cool my face. For the first time in years, I felt purposeful, energized. The weight of invisibility had lifted, replaced by something lighter but more substantial, the weight of possibility. That evening, as I worked on my proposal at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. It was Eleanor, carrying takeout containers and a bottle of wine. Michael Chen called me, she explained. Said you were cooking up something amazing and might need moral support. I laughed, touched by Michael's thoughtfulness. Come in. I have a lot to tell you. As we ate pad thai and drank crisp white wine, I told Eleanor everything, from the humiliation at the block party to the cultural board meeting, from Heather's thinly veiled hostility to my plans for transforming Crescent Heights. I'm proud of you, Eleanor said when I finished. You could have just accepted their apologies and gone back to your quiet life. Instead, you're building something new. I'm not doing it for them, I admitted. I'm doing it for me. And for David. I glanced at his photograph on the bookshelf. He always said community matters most when it's hardest to maintain. Eleanor raised her glass. To David, then, and to new beginnings. We clinked glasses, and I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. Tomorrow would bring challenges, skeptical neighbors, logistics to navigate, my own lingering doubts. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be present in this moment of friendship and possibility. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus in my garden, a symphony of small voices creating something larger than themselves. It seemed a fitting soundtrack for what lay ahead. 3 weeks after accepting my position on the cultural board, I stood at the edge of the vacant lot at the end of Maple Lane, watching a transformation unfold. What had been an overgrown eyesore for years was now a hive of activity. Neighbors in work clothes with gardening tools, children carrying small plants, teenagers setting up tables of refreshments. Mrs. Ellington, a young voice called out. 10-year-old Zoe Martinez ran toward me, her braids bouncing. Look what I brought for the garden. She thrust a small clay pot into my hands. Inside was a carefully tended tomato seedling. My abuela helped me grow it from seeds. It's perfect, Zoe, I said, genuinely touched. Why don't you show Mr. Patel where you'd like to plant it? He's helping coordinate the vegetable section. As Zoe scampered off, I surveyed the scene with a mixture of pride and disbelief. When Michael had first suggested launching the community garden project so quickly, I'd been skeptical. People need time to warm up to new ideas, I'd argued. Not this one, he'd insisted. Trust me, Mrs. E people are hungry for connection right now, especially in Crescent Heights. He'd been right. Once the flyers went up around the neighborhood and the email announcement went out, the responses had flooded in. Families offering to donate plants, the local hardware store providing tools, a landscaper volunteering design services, even the high school environmental club asking to be involved. The most surprising volunteer had been Mr. Abernathy, the reclusive widower 3 doors down from me who rarely left his house. He'd called me directly, his gruff voice uncertain. You're turning that lot into a garden? He'd asked. Yes, Mr. Abernathy. A community garden. Everyone's welcome to help and share in the harvest. A long pause. Then, I used to be a landscape architect. Before I retired. If you need any advice? Now he stood across the lot, kneeling beside a young couple to demonstrate proper transplanting technique, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. Michael appeared at my elbow, clipboard in hand. We've got 47 participants so far, he reported proudly. And Councilwoman Rodriguez just texted, she's bringing the mayor for a photo op at noon. I nodded, only half listening. I was watching Mrs. Takahashi and Janine Ellis working side by side on a flower border, chatting as if they'd been friends for years. Nearby, a group of children from different families played a complicated game involving watering cans, and much giggling. This was it, the vision coming to life. Not forced socializing or status displays, but genuine human connection through shared purpose. Has, everyone from the neighborhood shown up? I asked Michael, trying to sound casual. He knew exactly who I was asking about. The Prescotts haven't made an appearance, but almost everyone else from your street is here. He scanned the Proud. Even the new family that just moved in, the Patels, they're by the herb garden. I spotted them, a young couple with a toddler, looking slightly uncertain but smiling as Pastor Williams showed them different herb seedlings. Mental note: introduce myself later. The morning progressed in a blur of activity. I moved from group to group, connecting neighbors who'd never spoken, solving small, logistical problems, making sure everyone felt included. By noon, the transformation was remarkable. Neat paths divided planting beds filled with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. A small pergola stood at the center, built that morning by a team led by a retired carpenter from Oak Street. Someone had brought wind chimes that tinkled gently in the summer breeze. When Mayor Sanders arrived, flanked by Councilwoman Rodriguez and several other city officials, he stopped at the entrance, visibly impressed. "Marcia," he said, taking in the scene. "This is extraordinary." "It's not me," I replied honestly. "It's all of them." I gestured to the diverse group of neighbors working together. They just needed a reason to connect. The mayor's staff took photos, and he made a brief speech about community revitalization. But the real magic happened after the officials left, and everyone gathered for a communal lunch under the pergola. Sandwiches, salads, and homemade desserts spread across tables made from reclaimed doors set on sawhorses. I found myself seated between Mr. Abernathy and Janet Wilkins from the Cultural Board. "My son Kevin is coming to visit next weekend," Janet told me as she passed. A bowl of potato salad. "He specifically asked if you'd be around. Said he wants to thank you in person." "I'd love to see him," I replied, warmth spreading through me at the thought of reconnecting with my former student. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellington, I've been thinking about the irrigation system for the garden. We should set up something sustainable. I have some equipment in my garage, left over from my working days. Maybe some of these young people could help me install it." "That would be wonderful, Mr. Abernathy." His eyes crinkled in a rare smile. "George, call me George." After lunch, as the community garden project wound down for the day, neighbors exchanged phone numbers and made plans to return for watering shifts and future planting days. Children begged to come back tomorrow. Teenagers who had arrived looking bored were now exchanging social media information with new friends. I stood at the garden entrance as people departed, accepting thanks and well wishes with a full heart. When most had gone, I felt a presence beside me. "You did good, Mrs. E." Michael's voice was quiet. "We did good," I corrected him. "All of us. This is just the beginning," he reminded me. "The book exchange launches next week, and then the skill-sharing workshops." I nodded, suddenly exhausted but deeply satisfied. One step at a time. As we gathered the last of the supplies, a silver Mercedes pulled up at the curb. Heather Prescott stepped out, immaculate in white linen pants and a silk blouse, hardly gardening attire. Michael tensed beside me, but I touched his arm reassuringly. "It's okay." Heather approached slowly, her expression unreadable. She surveyed the transformed lot, taking in the neat garden beds, the pergola, the hand-painted sign that read Crescent Heights Community Garden, Grow Together. "This is impressive," she said finally. "Thank you," I replied. "Everyone worked very hard today." She nodded, a strange emotion flickering across her face. Was it regret? Envy? Something else entirely? "I saw the email about the book exchange next Saturday," she said, "at the community center." "Yes, everyone's welcome to bring books to share or swap. We're setting up reading circles too, one for children, one for teens, one for adults." Heather hesitated, then asked, "Do you need help with organizing or setup?" The question caught me off guard. Was this an olive branch, a bid to regain lost social status? Or perhaps, just perhaps, a genuine desire to contribute? In the end, it didn't matter. Community meant including everyone, even those who had excluded you. "We could use help with the refreshments," I offered, "and someone to coordinate the children's reading circle." Something like relief softened her features. "I can do that. I used to teach kindergarten before." She gestured vaguely toward her expensive car, her designer clothes, the trappings of the life she'd chosen instead. "I didn't know that," I said, genuinely surprised. "There's a lot people don't know about each other in this neighborhood," she replied. And for the first time since I'd known her, Heather Prescott sounded completely sincere. As she drove away, Michael shook his head in amazement. Did that just happen? Is she actually going to help? "We'll see," I said. "People can surprise you." Walking home that evening, I felt a pleasant ache in my muscles from a day of physical work. My clothes smelled of earth and growing things. Neighbors waved from porches and front yards as I passed, real waves accompanied by genuine smiles and calls of "Great, oh, job today, Marcia," and "See you at the book exchange." At my own house, I paused at the garden gate, looking at the home David and I had shared for decades. For the first time in 5 years, it didn't feel haunted by his absence. Instead, it felt like a base from which new connections were growing, spreading like the roots of healthy plants, invisible but essential. Inside, I showered off the day's dirt and made a simple dinner, which I ate on my back patio as twilight settled over Crescent Heights. A text from Eleanor lit up my phone. "How did garden day go? Changing the world yet?" I smiled and replied, "One neighborhood at a time." The Crescent Heights Book Exchange transformed the sterile community center into something warm and inviting. Bookshelves borrowed from the local library lined the walls, gradually filling with donated volumes as neighbors arrived. In the center of the room, comfortable chairs and cushions formed 3 distinct circles, one with tiny seats and picture books for children, one with young adult titles for teens, and one with mixed genres for adults. I stood near the entrance, greeting people and directing them to the appropriate areas. The turnout was even better than for the garden project, perhaps because this event required no physical labor, or perhaps because word had spread about the success of our first initiative. "Mrs. Ellington?" called a deep voice. I turned to see Pastor Williams approaching with an elderly woman I didn't recognize. "This is my mother, Ida. She's visiting from Georgia and insisted on coming when she heard about your book exchange. She was a librarian for 40 years. I shook Ida's hand, delighted. "We're so happy to have you. Would you consider leading one of our adult reading circles today? We're discussing how books have shaped our lives." Ida's face lit up. "I'd be honored." As I showed her to the adult circle, I spotted Heather Prescott organizing the children's area with surprising efficiency. True to her word, she had arrived early to help with setup and had brought an impressive spread of child-friendly snacks. Now she sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, arranging picture books by theme rather than alphabetically, a thoughtful touch that showed genuine understanding of how children browse. "Mrs. Prescott is a natural with the little ones," observed Janet Wilkins, appearing at my side with a stack of medical memoirs for the exchange. "Who would have guessed?" "She used to be a kindergarten teacher," I replied, watching as Heather helped a small boy select a book, her face animated in a way I'd never seen at neighborhood social functions. "Interesting the parts of ourselves we choose to hide," Janet mused. The observation struck me. How many of us in Crescent Heights were performing reduced versions of ourselves? How many talents, passions, and histories remained hidden behind manicured lawns and polite smiles? The book exchange officially began at noon. In the children's circle, Heather led an enthusiastic reading of The Giving Tree, complete with different voices for each character. The teens, initially awkward and phone-obsessed, gradually warmed up as Michael facilitated a discussion about dystopian fiction that evolved into a surprisingly deep conversation about social justice. And in the adult circle, Ida Williams held court with the wisdom of a lifelong book lover, drawing out even the quietest participants. I moved between the circles, my heart swelling at the sight of neighbors discovering each other through shared stories. Mr. Abernathy, George, revealed a passion for mystery novels. The young Patel couple turned out to be avid science fiction readers. Janine Ellis confessed a secret love for romance novels, with strong female leads, blushing slightly at the admission. As the afternoon progressed, something magical happened. The formal circles began to dissolve as people moved to follow interests rather than age groups. A 14-year-old fantasy enthusiast found himself deep in conversation with a 70-year-old woman who had been reading the genre since before he was born. A shy 8-year-old girl discovered that her stern-looking neighbor shared her love of books about wild horses. By 3 o'clock, the community center hummed with the sound of animated conversations. People who had lived on the same street for years were discovering each other for the first time through the books they loved. Addresses and phone numbers were exchanged. Recommendations were written on index cards. Plans were made for private book loans and informal discussion groups. I was arranging a new donation of cookbooks when a tall young man approached me, his smile achingly familiar. "Mrs. Ellington? I'm not sure if you remember me." "Kevin Wilkins," I said immediately, setting down the books to give him a proper look. "Of course I remember you. Your mother said you might stop by." Kevin had grown from a gangly, uncertain teenager into a confident young man. Only his eyes remained the same, thoughtful, slightly serious, with that spark of intelligence that had always made teaching him a joy despite his reading struggles. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for everything you did for me in high school. Those extra tutoring sessions, The way you helped me find books I actually wanted to read instead of just the assigned ones. You did all the hard work, I assured him. He shook his head. No, it was more than that. You saw me, really saw me, when most teachers just saw my test scores. He gestured around, at the book exchange. And now you're doing it for a whole community. I blinked back unexpected tears. I'm just providing the space. Everyone here is doing the real work of connecting. Kevin's gaze was knowing. That's what you always said about teaching, too. But creating the right space is everything. He glanced at his watch. I need to get back to my mom's house. I promised to fix her garbage disposal before dinner. But I'm in town until Wednesday. Maybe we could have coffee? I'd love to tell you about med school. I'd like that very much, I said, touched by the invitation. As Kevin left, I noticed Heather watching our interaction from the children's area. When our eyes met, she approached, smoothing her linen dress nervously. Your children's circle was a hit, I told her. You're a natural. A genuine smile softened her features. I've missed it, she admitted. Teaching, I mean. When we moved to Crescent Heights, it seemed like everyone was a lawyer or an executive or running some kind of business. Being just a teacher didn't fit the neighborhood image, so I reinvented myself. She shrugged. Got my real estate license, joined all the right committees. The confession surprised me. Why are you telling me this? Heather looked around at the vibrant scene. Neighbors laughing and talking, children sprawled on cushions with books, teenagers engaged in actual face-to-face conversation. Because you've created something real here, she said quietly, and I'm tired of pretending. Before I could respond, Mayor Sanders arrived with a photographer from the local newspaper. The next half hour dissolved into posed photos, sound bites about community revitalization, and congratulations from city officials on the success of the cultural board's initiatives. By the time the event wound down at 5 o'clock, I was exhausted, but exhilarated. Neighbors departed with armfuls of new books and, more importantly, new connections. Several people mentioned looking forward to the skill-sharing workshop scheduled to begin the following month. Others asked how they could get more involved with the cultural board's initiatives. Michael and I stayed to clean up, along with a handful of volunteers including, surprisingly, Heather. The mayor seemed impressed, Michael noted as we collapsed the last folding table. He mentioned something about additional funding for the cultural board. That's wonderful, I said. We could expand the community garden, maybe add a tool-sharing program to go with the skill-sharing workshops. Always thinking ahead, he teased. You haven't changed since high school. I smiled, but inwardly I disagreed. I had changed. Profoundly. The woman who had retreated into solitude after David's death, who had allowed herself to become invisible in her own neighborhood, seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone new. Not the young, idealistic teacher I had once been, but not the withdrawn widow either. Someone in between. Someone still becoming. As we finished cleaning, Heather approached me one last time. I'd like to host the first skill-sharing workshop, she said. At my house. I tried to hide my, surprise. That would be lovely. What skill would you like to share? I was thinking children's literacy. Tips for parents to help early readers, make reading fun, that sort of thing. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. Unless you think that's too... It's perfect, I interrupted. Exactly the kind of practical knowledge sharing we want to encourage. Relief flooded her face. Thank you, Marcia, for giving me another chance. After Heather left, Michael gave me a questioning look. Are you sure about that? Letting her host the first workshop? I considered his concern. Everyone deserves the opportunity to contribute their true gifts, I said finally. Even Heather Prescott. Walking home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The golden summer light bathed Crescent Heights in a warm glow, and for the first time since David's death, I saw not just houses but homes, each containing complex individuals with hidden depths, untold stories, and the capacity for both cruelty and kindness. Outside my house, I paused to check my community garden seedlings, which I'd transplanted to my front yard as a visible symbol of the project. The tiny plants had already grown, stronger, reaching toward the sky with surprising determination. Like the neighborhood itself, I thought. Like all of us. 3 months after the humiliation at the block party, Crescent Heights had transformed. Not physically. The manicured lawns and elegant homes remained unchanged, but in ways that mattered more. Neighbors greeted each other by name. Front porches that had served merely as architectural features became gathering places. The community garden flourished, providing vegetables for shared meals and flowers for spontaneous gifts. Today marked our 5th skill-sharing workshop, hosted at the Patel's modest home near the edge of the neighborhood. Priya Patel, a software engineer by profession and an accomplished Indian chef by heritage, had offered to teach traditional cooking techniques. 20 neighbors crowded into her kitchen and dining room, a diverse group spanning all ages and backgrounds from across Crescent Heights. I stood near the back, observing with quiet satisfaction. These workshops had exceeded my expectations. The first, hosted by Heather and focused on children's literacy, had broken the ice. Since then, George Abernathy had taught basic landscape design, Janine Ellis had shared her knowledge of wine appreciation, and Michael had led a session on public speaking. Each workshop revealed hidden dimensions of people I thought I knew. Each created new connections that extended beyond the sessions themselves. And each reinforced what I had always believed, but had forgotten during my years of isolation, that every person has something valuable to offer if given the space to share it. Marcia, you must try this. Priya handed me a small plate with golden brown samosas, my grandmother's recipe. I bit into the crisp pastry and savored the complex spices. Delicious, I told her truthfully. You're an extraordinary cook. Priya beamed. I've been thinking, she said, lowering her voice slightly. What if we created a Crescent Heights cookbook? Everyone could contribute family recipes, and we could sell it to raise funds for the community garden expansion. That's a wonderful idea, I replied, already envisioning the project. Let's bring it up at the next cultural board meeting. As the cooking workshop concluded, neighbors lingered to help with cleanup and continue conversations. I noticed Heather and Janet deep in discussion about an upcoming school fundraiser. George Abernathy was explaining irrigation techniques to the teenager who had become his unofficial apprentice at the community garden. Even Mrs. Takahashi, once so reserved, was laughing with Priya's husband about their shared love of science fiction. Michael appeared at my side, grinning. Another success, Mrs. E. Indeed, I agreed. Though I can't take credit for this one. Priya organized everything beautifully. But none of this would have happened without you, he insisted. You created the framework that's bringing everyone together. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Mayor Sanders. Need to speak with you ASAP. Important news about the cultural board. Can you meet tomorrow? I showed Michael the message. I saw a flutter of concern rising in my chest. What do you think that means? He shrugged. Could be anything. More funding? Expansion to other neighborhoods? Or, he hesitated. Or budget cuts. I finished his thought. Let's not borrow trouble. I'll find out tomorrow. As the gathering dispersed, I walked home alongside George Abernathy, who had become a friend in recent months. At 78, he moved. Slowly but deliberately, his mind still sharp despite his physical limitations. Quite a change, he observed, gesturing toward 2 neighbors chatting on a front porch we passed. 6 months ago, those 2 wouldn't have acknowledged each other at the mailboxes. It's remarkable what happens when people have a reason to connect, I agreed. Not just a reason, George corrected. Permission. You gave this neighborhood permission to be a community again. I considered his words as we approached his house. I'm meeting with the mayor tomorrow, I told him. Something about the cultural board. George's bushy eyebrows rose. Politics, he said wryly. Be careful, Marcia. Remember what matters. I nodded, understanding his caution. In my excitement about the community's transformation, I had almost forgotten the institutional framework that made it possible. The cultural board, the city funding, the official approval, all of which could disappear as quickly as it had materialized. That night, I sat on my back patio, watching fireflies rise from my garden like earthbound stars. The air was still warm with late summer heat, cicadas creating a rhythmic backdrop to my thoughts. Whatever the mayor wanted to discuss, I realized, couldn't change what had already happened in Crescent Heights. The connections formed, the skills shared, the barriers broken. These were real, tangible changes that would persist regardless of official programs or budget allocations. The next morning, I arrived at City Hall feeling strangely calm. Mayor Sanders greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, ushering me into his office where Michael already waited, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Marcia, great news, the mayor began, gesturing for me to take a seat. The Cultural Board's initiatives in Crescent Heights have attracted attention from across the county. The results are measurable. Increased civic engagement, reduced neighbor complaints, even a slight decrease in property crime. The commissioners have approved expanding the program to 3 additional neighborhoods. Relief washed over me. That's wonderful news, Mayor. There's more, he continued. They've also approved a significant budget increase and want to create a paid position to oversee the expansion, a director of community engagement. And they want you, Marcia. I blinked, processing his words. Me? A full-time, position? With a competitive salary and benefits, the mayor confirmed. You'd be working directly with my office, implementing what you've created in Crescent Heights across Santa Clarita. Michael beamed. Isn't it perfect, Mrs. E? Everything you've accomplished on a bigger scale. I should have been elated. 3 months ago, I had been invisible, humiliated, erased from my own community. Now, I was being offered a prestigious position, recognition, influence. And yet, may I have some time to consider? I asked. The mayor looked surprised, but nodded. Of course, the position won't be officially announced until next week. But don't wait too long. There will be other candidates if you decline. As I drove home, my thoughts churned. The position represented everything I had once valued. In my career, the opportunity to make a difference, to work with diverse communities, to implement educational principles on a broader scale. It was the kind of role I might have leapt at before David's death. But now I wasn't sure. The work in Crescent Heights had been rewarding precisely because it was local, specific, personal. I knew my neighbors' names, their children, their hidden talents, and quiet struggles. Would that intimacy be possible across multiple neighborhoods? Would I become an administrator rather than a facilitator? At home, I found an unexpected visitor waiting on my porch. Heather Prescott, holding a manila envelope and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Marcia, she said as I approached, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. Not at all. I assured her, unlocking my front door. Would you like to come in for tea? Inside, Heather perched on the edge of my sofa, the envelope clutched in her manicured hands. I heard about the director position, she said. Michael mentioned it might be offered to you. I nodded, unsurprised that news traveled quickly. The mayor just told me this morning. I'm still considering it. You deserve it, she said with surprising sincerity. After everything you've done for Crescent Heights, for all of us. She hesitated, then extended the envelope. That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to give you this before you decide. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. Letters, I realized. Dozens of them. They're from neighbors, Heather explained. Everyone you've touched through the cultural board initiatives. I thought you should know the difference you've made right here, before you decide whether to take on a bigger role. Stunned, I began to read. Letters from young parents thanking me for creating family-friendly community events. Notes from elderly residents expressing gratitude for renewed connections. A card from the teenage garden apprentice describing how working with George had helped him find direction. Even a handwritten letter from Janine Ellis acknowledging how the book exchange had rekindled her love of reading after years of social media brain rot. How did you collect all these? I asked, deeply moved. It wasn't difficult, Heather admitted. Everyone was eager to contribute. We were actually planning to present them at the Fall Harvest Festival next month, but when I heard about the director position, she shrugged. I thought you might need them now. As Heather left, promising to see me at the next cultural board meeting, I returned to the letters, reading each one carefully. The final letter in the stack was from Heather herself, written in elegant cursive on heavy stationery. Dear Marcia, it began. You won't remember this, but 15 years ago, you spoke at a teaching conference in Pasadena. I was there, a new kindergarten teacher, overwhelmed and unsure of my choice. Your talk about creating community in the classroom changed my perspective entirely. I implemented your ideas and had the best year of my teaching career. When we moved to Crescent Heights 5 years ago, I abandoned those principles, choosing status over substance. Watching you rebuild our neighborhood's sense of community has reminded me of the educator I once was, and hope to be again. Thank you for the second chance. Heather. I sat with the letters spread around me until evening shadows lengthened across my living room. Then I picked up my phone and called the mayor. The morning of the Crescent Heights Fall Harvest Festival dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October day. Golden light filtered through trees beginning to turn, casting dappled shadows across the community garden where we had gathered to prepare. 6 months had passed since that fateful block party when I'd been turned away at the entrance. 6 months of transformation, not just for the neighborhood but for all of us who called it home. I adjusted the hand-painted banner stretched between 2 pergola posts. Crescent Heights Harvest Festival, growing together. The phrase had become our unofficial motto, appearing on the community cookbook, the newsletter, even t-shirts designed by the teenagers for the garden volunteers. Around me, neighbors worked with easy familiarity. George directed a team setting up tables for the feast. Priya organized the cooking demonstration area. The Prescott's teenage son helped younger children paint small pumpkins. Janine coordinated the book exchange tent, which had become a permanent feature of all our gatherings. "Marcia!" Michael called, hurrying toward me with his ever-present clipboard. "The mayor just texted. He's running late but will definitely be here for the official ceremony." I nodded, checking my watch. "That gives us more time to make sure everything's ready." Michael studied me with a slight frown. "Are you nervous about the announcement?" "A little," I admitted. "It's a big change." "A good one," he assured me. "The right one." 3 days after receiving Heather's collection of letters, I had called Mayor Sanders with my decision. I would not accept the director of MAM community engagement position, at least not as initially proposed. Instead, I had outlined an alternative, a part-time consulting role where I would help develop cultural board initiatives in other neighborhoods, while remaining primarily focused on Crescent Heights. "I can provide the framework," I'd explained, "but each neighborhood needs its own Marcia Ellington, someone who knows the community intimately, who understands its specific needs and strengths." To my surprise, the mayor had not only agreed, but expanded on the idea. The new plan, which would be announced officially at today's festival, involved creating neighborhood-specific cultural boards throughout Santa Clarita, each led by a local resident with deep community ties. I would train and mentor these leaders while continuing to guide the Crescent Heights initiatives. "Mrs. E." A voice pulled me from my thoughts. Kevin Wilkins approached, accompanied by his mother Janet and a young woman I didn't recognize. "This is amazing." I hugged him warmly. In the months since the book exchange, Kevin had become a regular visitor during his breaks from medical school. "Kevin, I wasn't sure you'd make it today." "Wouldn't miss it," he assured me. "And I wanted you to meet someone. This is Aisha, my fiancé." I shook hands with the poised young woman, noting her warm smile and intelligent eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Aisha. Kevin has told me so much about you." "Likewise," she replied. "Kevin says you're the reason he's becoming a doctor instead of dropping out of high school." Kevin flushed. "Mom and Aisha are both staying in town for the week," he said, changing the subject. "They're helping me look at houses in the area." "Houses?" I repeated, surprised. "You're moving back to Santa Clarita?" Janet beamed proudly. "Kevin's been accepted for his residency at Santa Clarita Memorial Hospital, pediatrics." "That's wonderful news," I exclaimed, genuinely delighted. Kevin lowered his voice slightly. "Actually, we've been looking at a house right here in Crescent Heights, the Morrison's place on Elm Street. They're retiring to Arizona." I knew the house well, a charming craftsman with a deep front porch, perfect for a young couple starting out. "It's lovely," I told him. "And the neighborhood?" I gestured around at the bustling garden preparations. "Exactly," Kevin agreed. "This is the kind of community we want to be part of." As Kevin and his family moved on to explore the festival setup, I felt a profound sense of completion. A circle closing, the student becoming the neighbor, bringing fresh life and new perspectives to Crescent Heights. By noon, the Harvest Festival was in full swing. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes prepared from community garden produce. Children raced between activity stations. Neighbors who had once been strangers now chatted like old friends. Even the weather cooperated, providing sunshine warm enough to be comfortable but not oppressive. Mayor Sanders arrived with his usual entourage, but today he seemed less interested in photo opportunities than in genuine connection. I watched as he spent time with George, listening intently to the older man's explanation of the garden's irrigation system. Later, he joined a group of children painting pumpkins, rolling up his sleeves and creating a lopsided jack-o'-lantern that made the kids giggle. At 2 o'clock, Michael clinked a glass to gather everyone's attention. The mayor stepped onto the small platform we'd constructed near the garden entrance, microphone in hand. "Citizens of Crescent Heights," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. 6 months ago, I attended another gathering in this neighborhood, one that ended very differently than today's celebration. A ripple of uncomfortable recognition passed through the audience. No one had forgotten the block party incident, though few mentioned it anymore. That day, the mayor continued, I learned an important lesson about community, about who builds it, who sustains it, and who truly belongs. Today, I see the results of that lesson all around us. He gestured to the flourishing garden, the crowded tables, the diverse gathering of neighbors. What you've created here is remarkable. And it didn't happen because of city initiatives or government funding. It happened because one person, Marcia Ellington, reminded you of something you already knew. That true community grows from shared purpose, mutual respect, and genuine connection. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Several people turned to smile at me where I stood at the edge of the gathering. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the city of Santa Clarita will be expanding the Cultural Board Initiative to additional neighborhoods throughout our city, but we'll be doing it differently than originally planned. The mayor explained the new approach: neighborhood-specific boards, local leadership, with me serving as consultant and mentor rather than director. As he outlined the details, I watched my neighbors' reactions: pride, approval, understanding. And to lead the Crescent Heights Cultural Board going forward, the mayor concluded, I'm pleased to announce the appointment of a neighbor who has demonstrated extraordinary commitment to community building over these past months. He paused, and I held my breath. We had discussed this transition extensively, but the final decision had been made just days ago. Heather Prescott, the mayor announced. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd, followed quickly by applause as Heather made her way to the platform looking both nervous and determined. Thank you, Mayor Sanders, she said, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. And thank you, neighbors, for this second chance to serve our community. Not as I once did, through exclusion and social hierarchy, but through genuine connection and shared purpose. She turned toward where I stood. Most of all, thank you. To Marcia Ellington, who showed us what real community leadership looks like. Not controlling, but enabling. Not commanding, but connecting. The applause that followed was deafening. I felt hands patting my shoulders, heard congratulations from those around me. But it was the expression on Heather's face that moved me most. Genuine gratitude without a trace of her former calculation or competition. As the formal ceremony concluded and the festival resumed, I found a quiet moment alone near the garden's edge. The afternoon light was turning golden, casting long shadows across the flourishing plants that had once been tiny seedlings. Penny for your thoughts, said a voice behind me. It was George, leaning on his cane but standing straighter than he had 6 months ago. Just reflecting, I replied, on how much has changed. And how much hasn't, he added with his characteristic directness. People still want to belong, still need purpose, still crave connection. Those things never change. We just forget them sometimes. I nodded, watching children chase each other through the garden paths, teenagers teaching younger kids about composting, elders sharing stories over plates of home-cooked food. David would be proud, George said softly. Of all this. Of you. Tears pricked my eyes at the mention of my husband. I think he would. I agreed. He always believed in the power of community. As do you, George reminded me. You just needed to remember. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit throughout the garden, creating pools of warm light in the gathering. Darkness. Neighbors lingered, reluctant to end the celebration. Someone brought out a guitar. Children toasted marshmallows over small fire pits. The harvest moon rose huge and orange on the horizon. I found myself sitting between Heather and Janet at one of the long tables, watching the scene with quiet contentment. What a difference 6 months makes, Janet mused. From that awful block party to this. Heather winced slightly at the reference but nodded. I've been thinking about that day a lot, she admitted. About how I felt when everyone started leaving after the mayor's announcement about you, Marcia. I was humiliated, exposed. She looked at me directly. Exactly how I made you feel earlier that same day. It wasn't personal, I told her, meaning it. You didn't know me. That's just it, she replied. I didn't try to know you. Or anyone else here, really. She gestured around at our neighbors. I was so busy creating the perfect image that I forgot to create actual connections. Janet raised her cup of cider. To second chances, then. For all of us. We clinked cups, and I felt a sense of completion wash over me. Not an ending. The work of community building never truly ends, but a milestone. A moment to acknowledge how far we had come and to look forward to what lay ahead. As the festival finally wound down and neighbors departed with leftovers and tired children, I walked home beneath a canopy of stars. Front porches glowed with welcoming lights. Windows framed families and friends continuing conversations that had begun at the festival. Laughter drifted on the cool evening air. At my own house, I paused at the garden gate, taking in the home David and I had shared for decades. The grief of his loss would always be with me, a quiet companion on my journey, but it no longer defined me or limited me. In honoring his belief in community, I had found my way back to myself. Inside, I made a cup of tea and carried it to my study. On the desk lay the final draft of the Crescent Heights cookbook, ready for printing, and beside it, an outline for the first training session with the newly appointed cultural board leaders from other neighborhoods. But it was the framed photograph next to these that drew my attention. Not an old picture of David and me, but a new one taken at the community garden. In it, I stood surrounded by neighbors of all ages. Dirt on our hands, pride on our faces, the garden flourishing behind us, connected, visible, belonging. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. How was the big festival? I smiled and replied simply, perfect, in all the ways that matter. Outside, the harvest moon continued its arc across the sky, illuminating Crescent Heights with gentle silver light. In houses up and down the street, neighbors who had once been strangers prepared for sleep, connected now by something stronger than proximity. Something we had built together, seed by seed, story by story, moment by moment. Something that would endure long after the memory of that humiliating block party had faded. A community where everyone belonged, where every voice was heard, where no one remained invisible, where we had all finally come home.